These mountains, I've said it a million times, they're so beautiful, so rugged, but they hold so many mysteries that we can't explain. Some in nature, and some that just unexplainable. And sometimes I run into people like this. Ray Leman, he's 90 years old, and he's sharp as a razor in his mind, and he remembers so much of what he's done over 60 years in these mountains, of the work he done. He done all the exploration for all of our coal, finding it, laying it out throughout these mountains from West Virginia to Alabama. And he's got a lot of country to cover. And yes, he told me there's still plenty of oil in these mountains that he's found and mapped, and all the coal seams, different heights throughout these mountains, laying it out, facing it up, ready for these coal companies to mine it. For over the last 60 years, even found a 25-foot coal seam here. There's a picture of it, 25 foot. And he done reclamation, restoring the land like it was after they're done mining. And he's got some weird stories to tell of wildlife, nature, and some things that just can't be explained. And he's told me some of his stories. He's such a nice Christian man, sharp as a tack. Now you've seen him before in an earlier video of all his funny stories of the people he's encountered and the funny little stories around them in these mountains. So I'm just going to recreate the best I can as he tells his stories of the mysterious thing that he's experienced in these mountains. Ray, you got you're 60 years of working in these old mountains. I know you've run into a lot of strange things over the years. You want to share some of them stories with us?
Yeah,
some old strange things. What have you got that you just really puzzles your mind in these old mountains?
Well, I guess this was about 1962. I was doing field work out in Claiborne County. Bob Elam, a co-op student from UK, was with me, and we were doing field work up above Pruden, which is in Fondy there on Valley Creek. And we were sitting at about Hignite level, which is about 2,600 feet elevation in front of an old coal mine. And we were finding a cool place. It was the middle of July to eat lunch. And we found this old coal mine. And of course, in front of a coal mine, it's been deep mined while cold air comes out of there most of the time. So we sat down in front of it on some rocks to eat our lunch. And we were looking back to the southeast, sort of across above Morley and back in that area. And we saw a cloud, a dark cloud, just a small cloud. It looked like maybe 300 or 400 feet across, floating in the air, and it looked like it was coming toward us. And Bob said, "That's a strange looking cloud, isn't it?" And I said, "It is." And he said, "It's headed right toward us. It looks like it's coming right up Clear Fork toward us." So we were sitting there watching that cloud, eating lunch. And the cloud kept getting closer. So it was a small cloud. It looked at the time, just before it got to us, it looked like it maybe been 500 feet across. And it came over us. When it came over us, it got dark. And it snowed real hard for as long as the cloud was there. And then the cloud passed on across, and the sun was back out, hot as ever. And the snow just almost disappeared immediately. And Bob said, "That's the strangest thing I've ever seen." I said, "Well, it is to me too. I've been doing field work for a long time." And he said, "Well, I don't think I'm going to tell anybody about this because I don't think anybody will believe me." I said, "Bob, I won't tell anybody either." So I think all these 50 years or so since that happened, this might be the only time I've really talked about it.
And it snowed real hard.
It snowed real hard for just maybe a minute or two, and then the cloud was on past us.
And there was snow on the ground.
And there's snow on the ground and on us. And then it just melted because, of course, the temperature was over 90 degrees.
Ain't that weird?
It was real strange. I never saw it happen before or after.
That's weird. That's a weird one.
That's real weird.
So that's snow in July, huh?
Snow in July. And we had a similar thing happen with my son and me coming back from Indianapolis one day. I was driving an F-250 pickup truck, had some steel rods in the back, drill rods. We had messed up some threads and I had to go get some new ones. And he went with me, and it was before he started school, so he was only like 4 or 5 years old. And we got back to Jellicoe, and it come up a cloud like it was going to storm. And so we rolled the windows up, and I told him, I said, "We're going to have a hard time here." And we started up out of Jellicoe, and it started a hailstorm. And it hailed so hard that it was just, I was afraid it was going to break the glass out of the truck. And it was 4 to 6 inches on the ground of hail when we stopped up to the top of the mountain and measured it. It looked like snow, but it was solid. It was ice, just balls of ice, anywhere from the size of a small marble up to almost big as a golf ball. And it was dense in my truck.
Good. Great.
And he couldn't believe what was happening. Of course, I couldn't either, but I was afraid it was going to cause a wreck, and it may have, but most trucks or cars had pulled off to the side.
I've seen it snow. I've seen it hail so bad it looked like snow laying on the ground.
Well, this was 4 to 6 inches thick up on top of the mountain.
Yeah.
And this was probably 64, 65.
That's just weird stuff of nature.
Yeah, it is weird. And when they were building the interstate I-75, the Incurable, which is right, just about 30 miles, 25 miles south of the Kentucky line on 75, I was doing field work in that area on McLeod Mountain. And so they were taking a cut through there, and I took some pictures of a vertical rock formation in Pine Mountain. And the rocks were vertical, and somewhere I have a picture of it, 16 by 20 picture. And locally it's called the Devil's Racetrack because it's a wide sandstone that looks like it goes into the clouds.
Oh, really? Well, that's nice. Well, thank you for that story, Ray. Ray, you told me about an old story. When you're doing some field work, you got snake bit. You want to tell that story and what else you seen?
Well, I got snake bit on October the 10th, 1960, by a copperhead up on Walnut Mountain. And after I'd gotten bit, I walked on over to look at the mine. And on the way out, I was walking down top of Walnut Mountain, and there was a trail, and I heard something on the trail, and I stopped and sort of got behind a tree to see what it was. And the wind was blowing into my face as I was walking north. There was a north wind, and there was a black panther coming down the trail, and I had nothing but a rock hammer to defend myself. So I decided I better kind of make myself scarce. So I stood back behind a couple of trees, and
well, did it look like a Did it look like a panther or
Yeah,
a cougar or a mountain lion? What was
it was black, and there'd been reports before by motorists of seeing a black panther up in that same area along the interstate, and so I decided I'd stay out of its way, and it stood up on its back feet and sharpened its claws on the tree and stood there a minute, and I was afraid it was going to come on down toward me, but fortunately it turned and went the other way. And so I waited a while before I went on to the mine, but I didn't see it anymore.
And you was snake bit at the time?
A snake bit at the time, and I was concerned about that because uh, I wasn't sure, how it was going to affect me.
Well,
but fortunately, it didn't bother me too bad.
You had a long walk back to the truck, didn't you?
About a mile.
So if that'd been a rattlesnake, you'd been in trouble.
If I'd been a rattlesnake, they wouldn't have ever seen me again. I'd have been still out on Walnut Mountain, I'd say.
I would say, buddy. And my goodness, you're lucky there, buddy.
I came so close so many times with rattlers.
Yeah, I don't
real
like
close.
Yeah, that's a bad story right there. But did you get over that? Evidently, you got over it.
Yeah, it didn't bother me. I went to the doctor the next day. He told me if it was going to bother me, it would have bothered me that day.
Yeah.
And I went ahead. I was refereeing basketball games and even playing on a team at that time. Yeah, and I went ahead and played and refereed. They didn't bother me.
Well, if you'd been allergic to it, it could have bothered you.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, I've seen horses and cattle that were bit, eating grass, and come up on a snake, copperhead, get bit, and their face would swell up, and they'd have to take shots because they couldn't eat. They couldn't work. But
thank you for that story.
Yeah,
I believe I went back to the truck when I got copper bed here.
I figured if it was going to affect me, I wouldn't make it back to the truck anyway. So I just said a short prayer and went on.
Well, the Lord blessed you there.
He sure did. I never forgot it either.
But as far as that old panther, they claim there's no such a thing in these mountains, and I've always heard these stories for hundreds of years and read them, and people, eyewitness. I don't know if they're actual panthers. They called them painters, the old mountain people did. But are they mountain lions, or they some kind of cougar or whatever? But they're black cats. Yeah. How tall was it?
It was about the size was probably a 75, 80-pound dog.
Yeah.
About like a medium lab.
Solid black.
Yeah.
Shiny black.
Yeah. Short hair. Yeah. I had something sort of similar happen to me when I was in the second grade. I lived on Highway 58 in Chattanooga. And I always had a little rifle that I used to go out hunting with. We had several acres there, hill back behind us. And I went out one afternoon and come back to the house. I saw something that I was afraid of. And Daddy said, what'd you see up there? I said, I saw a bear. He said, no, you can't see any no bears around here. I said, I saw a bear. And he said, oh, you don't need to get out there anymore. He said, you didn't see no bear. And I said, okay. And so we ate supper that night. And about an hour after we ate supper, somebody knocked on the door. And it was a deputy sheriff. And he's wanted to know if we'd seen a bear that a circus trailer had a wreck up the road. And 3 bears had escaped. And they couldn't find them. And my dad called me in and said, tell him what you saw today. And I told him, I said, well, right up on the hill behind the house, I saw a bear. And and that guy said, well, can you show me where it was? And I took him out there and showed him. And they found it about half a mile from there, but they got the bears. Mm-hmm. So my dad, from then on, sort of listened to me when I tell him I saw something.
Yeah, I understand that. Thanks, Ray. What else you want to share with us?
Well, I was working for Addington Enterprises over on New River, up on Buffalo Mountain, And I had a dozer up there, a front loader too, and I had two guys helping me, or maybe there was three, I'm not sure. But it was about in the mid 80s, and we were working about, I guess it was a pee-wee level, which is about 2,600 feet, and we were opening it up, and we were going to alter an old strip pit, and I had these guys helping me prospect, and there was about a mile around from where we were working out on a point, there was a cemetery. People had been complaining because they couldn't get out there, and we had talked about building a road around that pit. Well, that morning, we walked out there to look at the area, see how bad it would be to get a road. And we had gotten back and started prospecting. And one of the boys looked up toward the cemetery there and said, "Looky there, there's a vehicle coming around through there."
It was a dead end road.
It was a dead end road, and no road there to speak of. It was just a pit, and so there was got closer. I could see that it looked like a green Jeep Wagoneer, and it came on around and pulled up close to us there and stopped. And this old man got out and stood there a minute, and then he walked up to us and came up to me and put his arm around my shoulder and asked me how I was doing, called me by my name, which puzzled me. I thought, well, I've seen this guy before. And all of a sudden I realized it seemed it was my grandfather who had died more than 20 years before. And that sort of shook me up, and the other guys were all flabbergasted that even a car came around through there, let alone, somebody that knew me. And so we talked for a little while. He asked about my family and children and all that. And then he said, "Well, I've got to go." And he went back down and got in that vehicle and went back toward the cemetery. And those boys said, "Well, he can't go nowhere that way." He said, "They said the road stops." I said, "Yeah, but don't forget, he came from that way." And so we waited a few minutes, and one of them said, "Well, I'm gonna walk back around there and see where he went." And he was gone a few minutes, and he came back. He said, "There ain't no tracks around through there." Said, "I don't know where he went." And they all looked at each other and said, "We haven't ever seen anything like that before." I said, "Neither have I." And that was one of the strangest and oddest things that ever happened to me. And it was just weird. Of course, I'd wish he'd come back a few more times.
Well, that is strange. That I would have been thinking about that, still thinking about that one.
I think about it quite often.
You met your grandfather who died 20 years before and had witnesses.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah, and I can't remember. Weird about it is I can't remember who was with me that day. I remember during that time, it may have been, and it could have been, but Keith Whitley, who's the singer that died up at Grayson or up in that area.
Yeah.
He was a singer, married Lori Morgan, in fact. And his brother's son was working for me.
Huh.
And I remember that, but he might not have been there that day. I don't remember. But right. I don't remember any of them's name because I used to have one, say 2 or 3. I'd have 2 or 3 one day and maybe 2 or 3 different ones the next day because of the people they were working with might be out or something like that.
Strangest dream, just that Wagoneer come out of that dead end road at the cemetery.
That's right. And what was strange about the Wagoneer was when I went to work back in 1964 with another company, the vehicle that I had was a Jeep Wagoneer, just the same color and everything. And it was weird. It was real weird.
That's weird. And that was just on a normal sunshiny day.
It was a day, probably. Yeah, it was a day that we were prospecting, and not a care in the world, not thinking about anything in particular, just seeing how thick the coal was.
What a weird,
get a sample, to get an analysis.
what a weird story.
And that was a weird thing that happened to me.
Thank you, Ray. I want to thank Ray for telling us these little stories, his personal experiences, and he has no reason to lie. A good Christian man, hard work all his life. And I appreciate his stories so much. There's nothing better than listening to our elders. And he told me so many other stories. He said he run into more rattlesnakes than he did anything around these old mountains, up on these strips and mountain tops and rocks. And these are his pictures of rattlers. Dozens of them, he said, over the years. And they said they had to watch out on their machinery. They'd run it all day. The next morning they'd come in to start. There'd be rattlesnakes up there trying to keep warm up on them motors and stuff. And they had to watch themselves really bad for these snakes. So many stories on them. He's seen a lot of stuff in these mountains, and he's still got a sharp mind to tell them. And he was the man to go to and the consultants. If you're looking for coal or minerals in these mountains, he knowed it and he mapped it. And he found a lot of old places like this, he said, out in these mountains. Old pioneer homes just lost in time. And he's got more stories than this. All the stories you told me, like Cumberland Mountain. And when they built this Cumberland Gap Tunnel, he's got stories of it. When they was building it, when it was started, and what they found in the middle of this mountain that nobody knows about. And I'll share them stories later. There's so many to tell. So I hope you like these little stories. Am I wasting my time? I don't know. But I like to share them, and they need to be remembered, our elders, and these stories to be passed on. So I want to thank you for watching. God bless, take care, and I'll see you next time.